Hello, everyone. 11 a.m. where I am. How's everyone doing today? If you could send me a comment in the chat just to let me know how we're doing. I would also ask, were any of you here for my prior presentation on Wednesday? Let me know if you were or were not. Fantastic, actually. You do not need to apologize. Delightfully polite there. So let me just get a quick confirmation. I'm looking at a second screen to see if this is screen sharing appropriately. Beautiful. It would be very kind of you to just poll into the chat. I would like to know where we are in our prep or studies. Have we taken a real GMAT? Have we taken a practice test? Are we just sitting here going, what is this GMAT thing? Thank you, Saviga. Beautiful, beautiful. Arjun, then I need to apologize to you because there will be some material here that you're probably already aware of. But I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of the material involved. Today, I want to take a few moments to talk about how the test works. The organization, the scoring algorithm, what it tests, etc. Then I want to take some moments and look at score data from the published score information for classes for a lot of the top 10 universities, and do some comparisons, do some discussion on what that data means for all of us, and then look at some reactions to that. And then we'll have some time for some final thoughts or questions from anyone else. Please do not wait until the end for questions. I'm more than happy to respond to questions at any time. So, we begin. This is the organization of the test. You have a quant section, you have a verbal section, you have an essay, you have integrated reasoning. Whoop, that is not what I wanted to do. For quantitative, there is never, ever, ever any reason to go with choice one. Excuse me, for the GMAT. Never go with choice one. The essay and integrated reasoning do not become part of your overall score. You would always want to start with choice two or choice three. The general thought is start with the section you feel is your strongest. Either you quant, break, verbal, break, and then do the stuff that we're not that concerned about, or verbal, break, quant, break, the stuff that we're not that concerned about. Just a few notes about the format of the test. Now for the scoring algorithm. Is everyone aware of the term computer adaptive test? Just a quick yes or no. Do you know the term computer adaptive test? And so we get test canceled due to COVID. Yeah, that's everyone. Everyone around the world. Perfect. Computer adaptive test, meaning that the test gives you harder questions as you get questions correct, easier questions as you get questions wrong. I just want a check to see our understanding of that mechanism. Which of these two profiles would result in the higher score? One or two? Student one, they reach very, very high difficulty levels, but do tail off at the end. Student two never reaches the heights of student one, but also never tails off at the end. Who receives the higher score? Two will receive the higher score. The test prizes consistency, and it rewards consistency over spikes and dips in your performance. Also, the test is very strongly measuring your understanding of resource allocation. The only resource you can control in this test is time. And the scoring algorithm is looking to find people who can allocate their time wisely to know when problems are not worth their time and just make a decision and move on. Abu, what if someone entered into the test center 5 minutes late? Should he not choose the first one, the essay and integrated reasoning first? I'm not entirely sure of the thrust of your question. If you enter the test center 5 minutes late, that you would just begin the test. At the very start of the test, your time starts, and the test continues to move with the appropriate amounts of time for each section and the appropriate amounts of time for each break. You make your decision on which order before you ever start the test. And so there would be no, I entered a few minutes late, let's select the order then. If you choose the AW first, then take some time to relax. Abu, I'm not entirely sure why you would be relaxing for an hour. Most people would merely be making themselves more anxious. Certainly try it with the essay and integrated reasoning first if you think that might be best for you. I'm not saying that you can't take the essay and integrated reasoning first. I am merely speaking to the experience and preference of the vast majority of test takers who prefer to do it last. But you may, and in fact, one thing I do recommend to everyone is build a warm-up set of questions from the official guide so that you can have a little bit of mental energy walking into the stuff that really matters. You would choose 5 questions from the quant or 5 questions from the verbal for whichever of those 2 sections you'd be taking first. Do those before you enter the test center, and then that way you have your brain moving in test-taking mode before going into that. What is the point of the essay in integrated reasoning, and how much time should you spend preparing for it? The point of the essay is, cynically, but I believe accurately, the point of the essay is a defense against application fraud. Most schools request an essay as part of your application that you would write, revise, craft very carefully over the course of probably several weeks. And so imagine for a moment that you send in this beautiful, wonderful, exquisite piece of prose for your essay, for your application, and then the school sees your AWA score is a 2. Now the school is wondering who wrote your application essay. The essay and integrated reasoning are more than anything else merely red flags for schools if you do very, very poorly compared to the other parts of your application. So, yeah, I closed it, Abhijit, because we weren't talking about the scoring algorithm for the moment. So, essay and integrated reasoning, more than anything else, they are checks on the validity of the other parts of your application. They are not the emphasis of any admissions decision. You would not want to spend much time at all preparing for them. Integrated reasoning, Manhattan Prep, the company that I represent, has a tool called Interact, which are a series of lessons. They have a lesson on the integrated reasoning section. I send my students to that integrated reasoning lesson and tell them to do that lesson. It takes about an hour. And then after that, merely attempt integrated reasoning sections for all of your practice tests so that you become familiar with the format and style of questions. For the essay, there is a chapter at the very back of the official guide about the essay, and it includes sample scored essays from previous test takers. I tell my students, look at the essay that was scored a 6. You will see that it follows a very clear format. The argument, plan, recommendation, whatever, is not well thought out because it fails to consider certain aspects of the situation. The first aspect it fails to consider with discussion. The second aspect with discussion. Final aspect with discussion, and then a close with summary. A red flag score would be below a 4 on integrated reasoning and below a 4 on the essay. You want to score 5 or above in integrated reasoning. You want to score 4.5 or above on the essay. Coming back to the scoring algorithm. I'll wait for a moment, let the presentation load again. Beautiful. Student 2 does receive a higher score. Student 2 manages their time wisely. The student 2 is more consistent. Most importantly, student 2 does not give any signals that they suffer disastrous losses all clustered together in one spot. And that is one very effective way to think of this test. How do I not only maximize gains in terms of getting questions correct, but how do I minimize my losses? And how do I make sure that my losses do not all arrive in one particular component of the test? Sai, what is a good GMAT score to compensate for low GPA? Let's talk about this in just a few moments. Let's skip forward. A few more notes about how the test works. Sai, do not worry, I will come back to your question. The test starts you off on question 1 at the middle difficulty rating. Let's say you get that one correct. The test now knows you need to be in the upper half. Where in the upper half will the test place the next question? At the low end of the upper half, at the middle of the upper half, or at the very high end of the upper half? That is a question I would like everyone to respond to in chat. Low, middle, or high? Where will the second question go inside the upper half? Ankit says mid-upper. Ankit is trying to cheat by giving me 2 options when I asked for 1. It will go in the middle, yes, because that is where the test wants to go. So it will go here. So you get that question correct as well. Now the test knows you're in the upper quarter. Will the test go to the low end, middle end, or high end of the upper quarter for that third question? Where will the test go for the third question? Low, middle, or high of the remaining? I knew what you meant, Ankit. I was just joking. Again, I would like for everyone to respond. Where will the third question go if you've answered 2 in a row? We'll go to the highest of highs, the middle of the high. Everyone is saying the middle of the remaining. And that is what would make sense. That is not what happens. Kana actually has it correct. That next question will be the most difficult question the computer has, which, if you think about that for a moment, is very strange. because that question is wasted. The scoring algorithm works by differentiating an individual test taker from the entire universe of previous test takers. It wants to try to see how you behave differently from other people. It starts in the middle because, right or wrong, a question in the middle will differentiate you from half of all test takers. You get it right, so now you are in the upper half. It gives you a question in the middle because, right or wrong, the computer will differentiate you from the other test takers in the middle, in the upper half. The third one does nothing. We will get it wrong. Everyone will get the hardest questions on this test wrong. The hardest questions on this test have an accuracy rating of about, and I say this quite literally, an accuracy rating of about 1 out of 500 or 1 out of 1,000 people get it correct. And I know that you're thinking that, Chris, that can't be right. We'll come back to that in a moment. You'll get it wrong, and you'll look like everyone else. Everyone will get that question wrong. So there are two things going on here. The reason this third question spikes so highly in difficulty is the nature of the algorithm and its two normally complementary goals. The algorithm is trying to find the level of difficulty of question that is appropriate for you. And it is also trying to find a level of difficulty where you get questions correct just slightly more than half the time. The scoring algorithm functions best when the accuracy rating for the test taker is 60%. 60%, maybe 55%, 55 to 60% correct, 40 to 45% wrong. And inside the first few questions of each section, when you start to get several questions correct in a row, you are driving very, very far away from that desired accuracy rating. At the moment, the computer only sees 2 questions correct from you and 0 wrong. You are now, mathematically speaking, infinitely far away from the computer's desired accuracy rating. The computer is freaking out right now. The computer does not know what to do. And so the computer is thinking, I must get some wrong questions from this person. And so it will continue handing you hardest questions until it starts to see wrong answers from you. Now, Sai, what if we get a lucky guess? And you get the third question correct just by luck. Here is the next interesting component of this thought. If you get that third question correct, to what extent does it contribute to your score? That third insanely high difficulty rating question, and you manage to get it correct by a lucky guess. Or you manage to get it correct by spending 4.5 minutes on it, which, for the love of all that is good and beautiful in your life, do not spend 4.5 minutes or anything close to that on a question. But you do get it correct. What contribution does that make to your score? That is a question I would like for everyone to answer in the chat. What contribution would that third question make to your score if you get it correct? It makes no contribution whatsoever because it is thrown away. The scoring algorithm recognizes that this is a multiple choice test, and every multiple choice test has the possibility of luck. And so what the algorithm does is it takes one of your highest rated questions that you get right, and it throws that question away, removes it from scoring, and says, this is my correction factor for the questions you got right because you got lucky. Now that sounds evil, but it is fair because it does the same on the opposite end. It takes one of the lowest questions that you get wrong, and it throws that one away, removes that from scoring, and says, this is my correction factor for the times you did know what you were doing and you just got unlucky. Bottom line, answer questions to the best of your ability within the time you have. If and when you recognize that a question would take more time than it is worth, do not spend time on that question. It will not provide any benefit to you. Ankit, if we get, say, 10 to 12 questions correct in a row, how will the algorithm function? Ankit, the algorithm breaks. Like, no joke, the algorithm breaks. And it will just continue to give you hardest questions, and it will throw a score at you at the end, but the algorithm, in a functional sense, breaks. The computer is designed very, very carefully, and questions are designed very, very carefully to make sure that does not happen. Sai, how do we recognize these questions? Well, you recognize it by the first word answer is practice. That is not a satisfactory answer. So let me give you a little bit more depth to this. As you study and prepare for this test, you will begin to recognize content areas which you perform better in and content areas which you perform worse in. Content areas where you are more apt to solve the question quickly, and content areas where even if you can answer it quickly, it never happens quickly enough. You will develop your own abilities and knowledge of your weaknesses. And essentially what you do is you start with an idea of, is this question hitting a content area that I'm familiar with and comfortable with? Does this question feel familiar or unfamiliar? If the answer to both of those questions is yes, then you do that problem. It's when you recognize that the content or style or presentation of the question is not familiar to you, and you spend 30 to 60 seconds considering it, and you still do not know what is happening, that is when you get out. The other aspect of this is you need to consider how many layers are involved in each question. For example, let's say you have a question that is about a triangle in a cylinder. So now you have two-dimensional geometry and three-dimensional geometry, and it is asking about what is the probability of landing inside that triangle in some other situation. So now you have two types of geometry with probability mixed in, and at a certain point you have to go, there are too many layers to this question. And I know each individual layer, but I also know that as you stack them this often, you have to leave that question alone. Ankit, you got the first 12 questions correct and then had an accuracy of about 60%. Yes, that's the way the test is supposed to work. Got a Q48 only. I'm intrigued by the word only at the end of that sentence. Quant 48 out of how much? Or put another way, let me skip forward for a moment. Ranuk, yes. Or Ranuk, sorry. You leave a question alone and you make a guess and you move forward. You have to put in an answer for every question because the computer needs your answer for each question to know what question to select next. So you make a guess and you move on. I'm pausing for a moment, letting the screen share and presentation come back because you do need to see the presentation to respond to my next question. There we are. If this is someone's score report from a practice test, where should they place their emphasis? Quant or verbal? Subhash, people who score Quant 51 only get 1 or 2 questions wrong. You need to rephrase that. People who only get 1 or 2 questions wrong will have a Quant score of 51. However, you can miss more than that and still score a 50 or 51. I have taken practice tests to show this to tutoring students where I missed every 5th question. So I missed 6 questions overall and scored a 50. Those of you who say quant, what information are you using to make that decision? Subhash, what number will the wrong questions be for 50? That is a question that really has no meaning for this test. Your score is the difficulty rating of the questions that you missed almost half the time. There is no magic number of right or wrong questions to get a desired score. You can make estimates based on trends, but there is no answer to that question. Your score is very literally what difficulty rating were you given when you got almost half of them wrong. I thought that you might be saying percentiles. Percentiles useless. Do not use percentiles. This is actual data from GMAT. This is accurate up to last July. They release new numbers every July, so we do not have the new numbers yet, but this is last July's numbers. What do you notice? What are some intriguing aspects about the score versus percentile relationships? Kana, I'm saying that the individual subscore percentiles don't matter because your overall score does not come from those numbers. And if you notice on this chart, the mean score for verbal, what is the percentile for the mean score for verbal? A mean score for verbal sits almost at 50th percentile. The average score for quant is not anywhere close to 50th percentile. What else do you notice that is intriguing about the percentiles, this time particularly in the verbal section? Look at the top end. Look at where you hit 99th percentile on verbal. These subscore percentiles are not close to a bell curve style distribution. And so you cannot use them as indicators of where you need to put your efforts. You look at this as Quant 43, you see 96th percentile at 51 for Quant. So people do score 51 in quantitative. That is a realistic goal. You'd say, I have 8 points remaining in quantitative. 37 in verbal. If you hit 99th percentile in verbal at a score of 45, a realistic verbal score maxes out at 45 or 46. Beyond 45 or 46, there is no reliable way to plan or prepare for that score. And so you look at verbal and you'd say, I have a 37 score out of a possible 46. I have 9 points left in verbal. This person would want to have balanced studies because they have 8 points left in quant, 9 points left in verbal. They have essentially the same number of points remaining to them in each section. And the score is calculated by very literally adding up the two subscores. That 43 plus 37, whatever those two numbers add to, that puts you inside a 20-point range. So this 43 plus 37 is probably within a 640 to 660 range. 700s happen at 85 total points. 85 total points from quant plus verbal puts you in this 690 to 710 score band. And it does not matter how much of those 85 points came from quant, how much of those 85 points came from verbal in terms of getting you to that score band. However, it adds up to 85. If the scores add up to 85, you are somewhere between a 690 and 710. The verbal scores do not dominate the quant when calculating the GMAT scores. The reason it appears that way is that nobody scores higher than around a 45 or 46 in verbal, whereas people do score 51s in quant. So it appears to be lopsided. But the actual score is very literally a result of the two scores added together. Now, when I say nobody scores a 51 in the verbal, it can happen, but you cannot plan for it. You look at this and you say 43 out of 51 for quant, 37 out of 46 for verbal. How many points are left? And let's plan my studies based on that. I'm going to pause for a moment. I would like for anyone to give me questions now if you have them. Say no questions if you do not have them. Also, now would be a good time to hit a like or dislike button if you are enjoying this presentation. Like if you're finding this information useful. Dislike if you're getting angry with what I'm telling you. Now, as you're doing that, I do want to make one final point. Some schools do prioritize a very high quantitative score. On this list, target schools, Stanford, Wharton, Columbia. Wharton I know. Columbia, I believe, are two of those schools. In fact, I believe Wharton would take a person with a higher quant score, but lower overall score, if all else were equal. So some schools, you need to do your research on this, but some schools really want to see a quantitative score of 47 or higher. Wharton would be one of those. How many points then for 740 plus? Ronak, there is a chart somewhere that spells that out. I don't have it in the slides here, but I would say about 90 points. That's a quick estimate, but I would say that's probably pretty reliable. Nagarajan, isn't the goal 720? Why concentrate on scores for both sections? Why concentrate on ceiling scores for both sections? Ceiling scores for both sections lets you know how many points you have left to gain. For example, was it Ankit earlier who said that they had scored a quant 48? Yeah, Ankit scored a quant 48. And yes, 48-49 is a high score for quantitative. You can only get to a 51. So Ankit, if you've scored a 48 in quantitative, no matter how much preparation you do in quantitative and how much work you do there, you can only get 3 more points. Whereas let's say you have a 48 in quantitative and a 35 in verbal. If you have a 48 in quant and a 35 in verbal, let me just stop the share for a second because we're just talking for a moment. If you have a 48 in quant, 35 in verbal, you could still get 11 points in verbal. You can get almost 4 times as many points in verbal then. And so you would absolutely want to concentrate your efforts in verbal because you can get more points there. So yes, 48-49 in quant is a high score. 43 in verbal is a high score. Ronak, how many points then for 740 plus? There was one point that came up with your question that I did not address previously and I want to address now. Ankit, I recognized you from the last one. Quant 47 on one of our tests is very, very high. At the higher levels, our tests do become more difficult than the actual test, actually. So, Ankit, you would definitely want to be putting your time into verbal there. Yes, opportunity costs, opportunity rewards. How many points are still available in which section? Now, sorry, distracted for a moment. Ranak, 740 plus. This is another one that I would like for everyone to respond with. What is your personal goal score? If you do not feel comfortable sharing that, that is fine. I understand. But I would, if you are comfortable sharing your goal score, I would like to see it. Please put it in the chat. I'm seeing good numbers so far. I knew someone was going to do this. 750. Do not make a 750 your goal score. 730 should be a goal score. Anything above 730 is great, but there is no way to plan for anything above the 730. You hit 99th percentile in the overall scores at a 760. So 760, 770, 780, 790, 800, all of those scores give no real differentiation in skill. They are all 99th percentile. At a certain point, it is just luck. Once you get past a 740, there is no way to plan for a certain score level past that point. It is literally just, did you have a good day? So please make your goal score 730, 720, above a 700. Do not make a goal score of 750 or something like that. It breaks my heart to talk to people who say they walked out of a test with a 710 and they feel like they failed because they did not get a 750. So please, 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 please make sure that your goal scores are something that can actually be planned for. And there is no planning for a goal score of higher than 730 or 740. Speaking for myself, and I do this professionally, I could walk into the test, if testing centers were open, I could walk into the test tomorrow and I know I would score above a 750 because I've been doing this for a decade now. But I could not tell you where within that 60-point band that I would know I'd be able to fall. At a certain point, it does become luck. What is a good score? Kana, currently it's 720. You want to go take the test. Now that assumes that is an honest 720. I have worked with people in the past who take and retake the free MBA.com practice tests so often that they start to see artificial score inflation because they're seeing questions they've already seen before. So in that instance, you would need to get another source of practice tests to get a better estimate for your actual score. But once your practice test score is within 30 points of your goal score, you want to get a test date. So this is some information, lovely information from our friends here at GMAT Club. What do you notice about these average GMAT scores? And Munil, doesn't it depend on your profile? As in, doesn't a quote-unquote good GMAT score depend on your profile? Is that your question? In the meantime, you notice that the top 10 scores all have average scores higher than 700s. In fact, many of their average scores hover in the 730 range. And I do see and read sources that say, if you cannot exceed the average score, don't bother applying. And whenever I see, read, or hear that, I wish I could take the person who says that and vigorously shake them. I am not a violent person, but that makes me very, very angry. Because that is very, very not true. You want a high score. You want a competitive score. But you do not need to exceed the average score for these top 10 schools. You want your score to be within range of the average, within plus or minus 30 points. After that, the schools looking at this then say, okay, the GMAT score is competitive. The GMAT score is in line with most of our applicants and in line with people who have done well with our program in the past. Now it's time to look at the rest of this person's application. Shruti, I know. I once spoke with a person, it was a tutoring student who said that they were working with an admissions consultant who said they needed to score a 750. And I said, What is that person smoking? You don't need a 750 to get into these schools. And they said, but my admissions consultant has a 95% success rate getting their clients placed in schools. And I'm like, of course they have a 95% success rate. They're telling people you have to have a 750 before you apply. My God, they should have a 99% acceptance rate at that point. You need your score to be competitive. You don't need it to exceed the average. Realistically, you want for these top 10 schools, you definitely want something in the high 600s. There are occasional outliers. Harvard accepted somebody who I think scored a 610 recently. And like there are a few of those in every school, but that person is definitely an outlier. You do not want to count on being that outlier. You definitely want something around 680 or 690, definitely. If that first digit is a 7, good. But once that first digit is a 7, start thinking about the other parts of your application. Start thinking about what else you can do to make yourself stand out. Pratap, work experience of 12 years and 690. Is there any possibility of getting admission in MIT Sloan? Very much so. I do not have personal experience with Sloan, but I do have personal experience with someone who was accepted at Booth with a 690. Guy's name is Austin. Very, very nice guy. I'm not going to tell you more about him because I don't want, not that any of you necessarily would do this, but I don't want people trying to track him down. Now, if the rest of your profile is weak, then it makes sense to have a high score to let the ad committee know about your competence. Yes, that is definitely true. There are many ways to let the admissions committee know, reveal your competence when you have other applications that are weak. The test score is probably initially the most time effective way and the way that requires the least explanation. I have also had good results with people who, for example, they take a graduate level course in whatever their weaker area is as part of, preparation for their application, and they basically give an addendum to their transcript and point out, hey, here is a recent class that I took at a graduate level at a respected institution, and this is what I did. I can do the work. Nikhil, score between 650 to 700 is considered low. 650 to 700 would be on the low end of competitive for the top 10 schools, but it is still competitive. You would want to be 680 or 690, I would say. A GMAT competitive score for INSID. Sai. INSID is another one of those schools that really likes those quantitative scores. So I would definitely make sure that you can get to a quantitative of, I would really urge you to shoot for a quantitative at least 47. And after that, aim for high 600s. For those of you asking me questions about specific schools, I will tell you that the adcoms at these schools are very approachable. You should reach out to them. I'm certainly here to answer all of your questions. I can give you my past experience with people that I've worked with, but I'm not a member of these admissions committees. Do admissions committees ask initial GMAT scores? They do not. In fact, when you apply, I'll stop sharing again for a moment. When you apply, you fill out the application and you state your GMAT scores. And the school takes you at your word. And they make the decision based on admit, waitlist, reject, based on what you've told them. Only after they decide which applicants to admit, they send those files to the staff who does the checking on the application numbers. And it's only at that point that they even bother to pull your reports from your undergrads and GMAC, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time they would even know that you've taken it more than once from the report, they've already decided to admit you, and they just want to make sure you did not lie on your application. Shruti, they would not. I doubt they would respond to such a broad request to just what is it? Does my profile fit your school? You would want to have more specific questions than that. Rockman, is it inappropriate to ask anything right now? If you're talking about asking me, ask away. If you're talking about asking adcoms, emails will still get a fairly good response, at least as far as I know. Anupama, what is a good GMAT score for PhD? That is a question I cannot answer. That is a question that no one could answer other than the admissions committee for that program. PhD applications are far more specific. And you would need to speak to specific programs regarding your score and what their target score would be. AWA and integrated reasoning scores do not factor in. They do not. 650 to 680 is considered low for the top 10 schools. Other than top 10 schools, however, 650 to 680 would definitely be competitive. I'd say 650 to 680 would be on the low end for probably top 30 schools. But you would want to get that higher. But you would want, at that point, something else in your application to make you stand out more. One last, well, yeah, actually, it's 10 minutes till the end of this presentation, so this will be something of a last note. Let me skip forward here quite a touch. Oh, I do need to make sure that we have sources for this data. So you have GMAT Club, another source here, blog called Prep Scholar. Notice the only reason I pulled Prep Scholar is because I happen to find median scores there. So just want to have a moment so that I give credit where credit is due for where I got this information. But you notice here, and I apologize for the quality of this image. It is screenshots that have been blown up to emphasize something. Notice that the average GMAT numbers and median GMAT numbers are not always the same. Why might that happen? That is a question I would like for everyone to consider in the chat or respond to in the chat. Why might the average and median scores not be the same? I love Ankit's response. Chris, that's just basic statistics. Come on, man. Be aware, and Shruti, yes, median should ideally be a much better indicator. Whenever you possibly can, try to pull both average and median numbers if the school publishes that information. Averages are pulled or heavily influenced by outlier trends. Put another way, everyone who magically scores a 780 on the GMAT throws an application Harvard's way. Harvard could, if they wanted, admit an entire class who scored 780. So those insanely high scores, those high scores that, again, as I said earlier, bluntly happen only if you, not only are you good, but also if you get lucky. The weight of those insanely high scores pull their average and distort the actual test profile of their typical applicant. Shruti, I think you may just not be looking in the right places. Oh, publishing the median. No, not enough schools publish their medians, at least not on their pages. I was looking for that when I was doing some research for our discussion today. You might need to grab a subscription to maybe U.S. News and World Report. There are some publications that might have more information on that. Schools will not, it's called, Rockman, what you're asking about is something called super scoring, picking and choosing the best parts of a particular score to submit. They will not do that. The schools want your scores to be representative of what you did in one test performance. So it's lucky. It's not that lucky guesses are not considered at all. It's that it throws away one lucky guess. It throws away one problem as a correction for, we do not want luck to weigh that heavily in your score. Why are there instances for the giant scores? Essentially what happens is when I say you get lucky, what I mean by that is you don't get lucky in terms of guessing the correct answer a lot of times. You get lucky in terms of the peculiar score mix for you. There are general trends in terms of what types of questions are considered. But let's say, for example, that you just got lucky in that you tended to get a better mix of, for me, for example, it would be statistics questions on the quant section. If I get a better mix of statistics questions on the quant section, I will perform better that day. If I get a better mix of geometry questions also, geometry questions for me can be a little bit hit or miss, not because I can't do them, but because they take me longer. And so I'm more likely to need to burn a geometry question and move on. There is some element of randomness in terms of how the question profiles pop up for you on any given test. That's why you see differentiation in scores. That's why you don't always get the same score when you go back and retake the test. There is one thing that is incredibly important. I want everybody to take a moment. I want you to type in the word yes after you've finished reading this quote. Thank you. Vaishak, applying for a second MBA. I'm afraid that is a more specific question than I can answer. We are now approaching the very end of our hour, right at the end of our hour. Does anybody have any last questions for me before we call it a day? Sai, good GMAT score to compensate for low GPA. Compensate for low GPA, I would say you want a 720, and I would urge you to try and make that 720 built off of a high quantitative score at that point. Rockman, I cannot say for sure. I do know that their schools are beginning to announce that you can submit your application by the deadline without a GMAT score, amend that application with the GMAT score once you have the opportunity to take it, and they will consider it as submitted on time, and your application will not receive any kind of penalty for having to submit the GMAT score after the application deadline. Do they know if I've canceled previous scores? Not anymore. As far as the admissions committees are aware, the canceled scores just never happened. For the top 20, is 700 sufficient? There is no sufficient or necessary to this. Sorry, Shruti, you phrased your question in a way that triggered my LSAT brain. I did take a moment to rework this. A 700 will make the schools look at the other components of your application. And that will make them look at the other components of your application positively. Accepting applications without GMAT, is it worth it to submit one in second round? No problem, Shruti. Ankit, do you mean submit in second round with a GMAT score? Because you cannot get a GMAT score by the time first round deadlines are open? I recognized you as well, Lecter, your name on this, yeah. Douglas Adams is still there. No movement in my bookcase since Wednesday. I actually did just get back into trying to read J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion. I started that once when I was in high school and just could not get through it. But I want to now. Without a GMAT score. Ankit, I'm so sorry. I wish I could tell you that I have a definitive answer for you. I would say submit your application. Your question is entering uncharted territory. I would submit it. If you're given the opportunity, I would make it clear to the school that you are willing and eager to take the GMAT when you can, when the testing centers are open. If you can submit some kind of like a letter of addendum or something to your application. But I would say go ahead and submit an application in that instance. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know about NSAID specific deadlines. Yeah, I made myself a promise that I would not read any of the books or watch the show until they were done. Now that the show is done, I'm probably go back and watch that. When the man actually finishes the Game of Thrones books, I might come back and finish reading them. But I was like, when I read somewhere that he had said that if he died with it unfinished, no one else was allowed to finish it, I was like, okay, no. Nope, I am not getting more into this if there's a chance it will never even be finished. Ankit, I would submit your application. I would also find some way to communicate to them your willingness and eagerness to take the GMAT as soon as you can if they want that, if they would feel more comfortable with that. I would say that at this point, it's an idea of a strong application without a GMAT score, along with a sincere indication that you want to work with them to make your application more attractive, is the best way to go. Samarth, no. It won't hurt. You certainly can take it again. But Samarth, once you've got a 720, you need to start putting the rest of your application together. I know. There is a demographics issue that is facing a lot of Indian applicants and has been the case for quite some time now. That my best advice for that would be to try and get your application in early in the application procedures or deadlines. As you get with rolling admissions, as you get later and later in the admissions process, they do start to be more specific about the other aspects of the applicant's profiles. Rockman, I don't know. 690 to 720 would, Subhash. You can apply and they will be looking at the rest of your application with a 690, but a 690 to 720 would make a difference. Rockman, do you mean international versus domestic institutions? I don't know. Manasij, an ideal score for an IT engineer? That's a touch more specific than I can answer. I'm sorry, Manasij. All right, everyone. It has been lovely. I do need to go now. I wish you all the best. Good luck. Throw out a like if you've been enjoying this. It really does help. And I would urge you again to reach out to my organization, Manhattan Prep. Be active within GMAT Club. And stay safe, actually, at this point in time. All right, everyone. It has been lovely. Nagarajan, that is a lovely question. I don't know. We would need to speak to GMAT Club about that. Stay healthy. Best of luck to everyone.